Bum 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 bum. Bum bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Hey everybody, come on in. Do you ever wonder why I do the simultaneous sip before my periscopes? Well, some of it is a bonding experience, of course. But I do it also, somebody asked about this, I do it also because it gives time for people to stream in before I get into the serious content, so I don't have to repeat myself. And so, because you're all here so early, it's time for the simultaneous sip, and all you need is a cup or a mug or a glass, a tankard, chalice, a stein, a canteen, jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better, the simultaneous sip. Go. To whoever said first time to come on time for the simultaneous sip, well, now you know the pleasure. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, so yesterday I was giddily telling you that I saw a clip where Conor Mcgregor, he's one of the top MMA fighters the world has ever produced, that his coach mentioned me and the idea of systems over goals as part of the training process for Conor McGregor. And I was sort of bragging about it a little bit on Periscope yesterday, that I'd done something useful that crossed into a domain that I would not have expected, actually. And then I realized that Conor McGregor was going to fight last night. I didn't realize that the reason his coach, trainer, was talking is because the fight was coming up. And suddenly I thought to myself, uh-oh, what if he loses? Here I've been telling everybody, well, I think I've had some influence, maybe indirectly or in a small way, in the process he's using to train. But if you don't already know, Conor McGregor won in 40 seconds. Let me say that again. He won the fight in 40 seconds. I believe the total tally of punches that the other guy landed was 0. I think, fact check me on this, but I think I heard that. I think I heard that the guy, the cowboy or whoever he knocked out, who was a top level fighter, it's not like he was beating up people who were just starting. This was a top competitor. And the outcome was certainly in question. And Conor McGregor beat him in 40 seconds, and the other guy didn't land a punch. So, I guess you want to read my book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, where I talk about systems are better than goals. If you can't remember the name of the book, just go to Amazon and Google my name and it'll pop up. Let's talk about my most ridiculous prediction. I suppose I've made some predictions that are pretty ridiculous, but none more ridiculous than the one I made about who will be the nominee for the Democrats. Now, a year and a half ago, I said, well, it's going to be Harris because she's got all the tools, but it turns out she's a terrible, just a terrible campaigner, like a really, really bad campaigner. So she's suspended her run. But here's what I think is going to happen. Would you agree that Joe Biden is sort of I guess you'd say he's the establishment Democrats' choice, but I think we'd all agree they're not terribly comfortable with him because of his age. They kind of like where he is policy-wise and his connections to things, but maybe not a full confidence in his current abilities. It looks like the plan is this. Now, by the way, did you know that Harris had one of the most endorsements from established people? That's important. Did you know that Harris also, I believe, had the most Hillary Clinton associated people working on her campaign. Did you know that? That's important because it does seem that Harris was who let's say the Clinton holdovers, who you imagine have deep state kind of influence, it looks like they wanted her, but she wasn't getting any traction and she was doing a terrible job of campaigning. But she's almost a perfect complement to Joe Biden because he's older, she's young. So that gives you a little confidence that if something happened to him, you'd say, well, at least there's a young person with Senate experience. You know, it's not going to be the end of the world if Joe had to exit the job a little early. So that's a good compliment. Secondly, she's a person of color. No, so is Cory Booker. Cory Booker, very solid, capable public servant, senator. Cory Booker would be great, right? Except Cory Booker's a man. If you have a choice of having your running mate, let's say you're Joe Biden, a choice of having someone who is only a person of color, but unfortunately a man, versus someone who's a person of color, but hey, a woman. Which is better? Which is a better compliment? No question about it. There's no question about it. The best compliment to the ticket is Harris. Now, I have a second theory, that part of the reason that Harris disappeared is that it was a way to close down the campaign and get rid of her sister as her main advisor. Because if you're the part of the, let's say, Clinton shadow government, deep state, Democrat establishment people, you kind of needed to get rid of Harris's sister in order to make Harris useful. I'm going to say that she may be undergoing some kind of coaching, mentoring, practice situation. And I think that if she were to be nominated for vice president or picked as a running mate, by Biden, that the next time you see her, she's going to come back stronger, meaning more charisma, better presentation, a little more crisp message, on point. And so that's what I would look for, because I believe she's very coachable. Harris is unique in that she doesn't seem to have any problems that I would consider unsolvable natural problems. It all seems like technique. Now, some have pointed out, hey, Harris does not have a lot of popularity in the African American community. Doesn't matter, because Joe Biden does. Joe Biden's popularity in the African American community is so high that he doesn't really need to bring more in by his vice presidential pick. He just needs to show that he's being, open to diversity and he's being inclusive. And that's why she'd be a perfect complement. Either of them individually is a little weak, but together they actually fit pretty well and better than anybody else, at least who's a name in our consciousness right now. So the other part of the prediction is that by election day, if it turns out it's a Biden-Harris ticket, that by election day, either literally or in kind, people will be talking about Harris as the top of the ticket. Now, they might be saying, hey, let's flip him before election day because Joe Biden looks like he's falling apart. Or they might say, well, let's get through the election the way it is, but at least we've got our emergency spare ready. So I think you're going to see Harris. This is my most unlikely prediction of all time. I believe that there's not one person here who would agree with me, is there? Probably not one of you. And that's what makes it fun. All right. So we'll just track that one. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I've got a theory about Mexico. There was a story that the Mexican military stopped a big crowd of Guatemalans who were trying to penetrate the southern border of Mexico, if I understand this right. And Mexico is doing a good job for the United States, being a good neighbor and partner by stopping it before it gets to our border. And I say to myself, why is it that the government of Mexico was so good on this point but not good on, let's say, fighting cartels. Because I look at what the government of Mexico is doing. They're putting a lot of money and resources, and it feels like they're doing it almost entirely for the benefit of the United States. Does that seem in character? Does it make sense given the other things they're doing? So how does it make sense that they're so flexible, and really more than flexible, they're putting major effort and resources into doing something we want, stopping people coming through their southern border before they get to our border. But at the same time, it feels like they're doing absolutely nothing about the cartels, at least in terms of how much we've offered to help them, and they've said, no, let's go with the hugs, not the guns. How could you explain those two things? Well, unfortunately, there is one way to explain it. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a truth. I'm going to say that it would explain our observation in a way that nothing else does. And it goes like this. The cartels effectively own the government of Mexico. The cartels make a tremendous amount of money helping small groups of mostly Mexican citizens across the border. So it's a gigantic profit center for the cartels to let the onesies and twosies across the border, lots of them. I mean, it's a big volume, but they're coming across in small groups. The reason that the Guatemalans form up into large convoys is so that the cartel can't abuse them and can't take their money and can't profit. So, it seems that the government of Mexico is very, very flexible and willing to work with us when it helps the profit of the cartel. Now, it helps us, so I think we're pretty happy that Mexico is stopping the caravans, but the caravans were the one way that the cartels couldn't make money, because they formed cartels for that purpose, so the cartels could not, blackmail them and threaten them. It was a security reason. That's why they do it. So my guess is that the reason that there may be perhaps even some kind of understanding with our government that we're really dealing with the cartels, and that if we can get them to stop the massive immigration, at least we got something. And we're going to have to figure out what to do about fentanyl later. I saw on news, I don't know who was talking about it, that we have some kind of process where we check the incoming, I guess once a month, we randomly check incoming shipping containers or goods coming in from China. In our recent checks, something like 15% of all the goods coming in from China are contraband. 15%, 1-5. 15% of everything that's coming in from China is either counterfeit goods that are competing with American products or other products, could be European, and fentanyl and drugs. 15%. And apparently that's the way it's one of the ways we can tell if they're cooperating over time. So once a month they'll do a survey, and if it's still 15%, it means that China is not cracking down on intellectual property, they're not cracking down on fentanyl, because they have the ability. We know they have the ability. And so I'm looking at all this, and I'm thinking, I don't know if we've done enough working with China to stop the fentanyl. I hear there's something happening, that there's noise about them being successful, but I'll say it 1,000,000 times. As long as the top known fentanyl dealer in China is still free, which I believe he is, somebody can fact check me on that, but I believe he's just shopping and walking around and selling fentanyl by the barrel. As long as that guy is still alive and free, China's not doing anything. That's not real. All right. Scott Jennings had an interesting opinion piece on CNN, which I took some inspiration from for a tweet. And Scott Jennings' point was that, here's the way I summarized it in my tweet. So these are my words. I said it's starting to look as if the permanent stain of impeachment will be on Pelosi for trivializing the process while at the same time it confirms that Trump is directly over the target he was elected to destroy. Now, Scott Jennings' point, which I basically stole to reword into a tweet because I wanted the crisp version because it just transmits better small. His point was that Donald Trump was elected to break the parts of the government we don't like, right? I mean, that's pretty true. Nobody elected Trump to be a steady state, to keep it the same, keep this ship going just the way it was. He was brought in to just break stuff. He was brought in like a wrecking ball to just wreck all the stuff that was frozen and broken and corrupt. Now, of course, he can't get rid of all corruption and all problems in the government, but what would you expect the world would look like if he were successful in doing what his voters asked him to do? What would that look like? Well, one of the things that I think you could predict is that the other side would try everything they could to stop him. They would try all the easy stuff first. Let's try to beat him in the election. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try to beat him in public opinion. Okay, he's really good at that. That's not working. Let's beat him by controlling the press. Uh-oh, he just delegitimized the entire press. Let's use our deep state and the people we have in maybe the FBI or the Department of Justice. Uh-oh, they got caught. Think about it. The Democrats have thrown everything you could throw at this president. What would be the most natural result of, here's the key point, and this is what I'm stealing from Scott Jennings, what would be the natural outcome of Trump succeeding at what he promised his voters? Impeachment. Given that the House is controlled by the other party. You would expect, and in fact we should have been able to predict, that the better Trump did in terms of destroying the things that people wanted him to destroy, everything from the press to every old way of doing things. Apparently he was calling his generals idiots. I'm not even sad about that. He came in to break stuff. He's breaking stuff, and he's not breaking the stuff I didn't want broken. He's only breaking the stuff I thought needed to get a little bit broken. At least shake the box, right? So this weird thing is forming, which is that the impeachment is starting to morph or evolve from the worst stain a president could have to, wait for it, the clearest signal that he's doing what the voters asked him to do. You could not have a more clear signal that he's right over the target because he's getting all the anti-aircraft fire. They're unloading the clip, right? They're throwing everything at him. It's all they had left. And it looks desperate, does it not? Impeachment is starting to look like a death rattle for the Democratic Party. And it's starting to look, not even starting to look. I can state this as a firm statement of fact. Pelosi is going to wear the stain of impeachment forever because she broke one of the most important parts of the Constitution. She broke impeachment by mistreating it, by trivializing it, by using it as a base political tool instead of the last resort. She's going to have to live with that forever. Every time in the future there's another impeachment, and you know there's going to be a lot of them, every time your president is a different party from the House, impeachment's just automatic. And what will every story say about that? They're going to say Pelosi did this. They're going to say Pelosi broke this. This used to be a process that would get rid of a Richard Nixon. Now it's not. Now it's just a broken partisan thing. And that stain will be on Pelosi forever. But what about the stain on Trump? Well, here's the thing. If you get impeached because you did, let's say, what Richard Nixon did, well, that's a stain forever. If you get impeached for what Bill Clinton did, it's kind of a mixed bag, isn't it? How many of you think back to the Clinton administration and think, well, let's say if you're a Democrat, how many look back to the Bill Clinton administration and say, you know, he did a whole bunch of good things. It was a very successful administration from my perspective as a Democrat. And by the way, I would agree that Bill Clinton had a successful presidency. But I have not once, not one time, have I thought back and said to myself, you know, I think less of Bill Clinton because he got impeached. Not once. I don't believe Bill Clinton has a stain on his presidency as big as the stain he left on Monica's dress. You know, certainly it's part of the story. Everybody's heard of it. He would prefer that didn't happen. His supporters would prefer it didn't happen. But if you're talking about the impeachment itself, which did not remove him from office, is he stained by the impeachment? Not really. I mean, he might be stained by the event itself, but his presidency looks completely intact to me. Am I wrong? How many people think less of Bill Clinton because of impeachment? I don't think I've ever met one person. Have you? Test it on yourself. Bill Clinton actually did something that both parties thought was worthy of impeachment, or at least enough of them thought it was worthy of impeachment. And there's no stain. There's a stain on what he did, but not on the impeachment part. So I think Bill Clinton tells us what's going to happen with Trump is that it's going to look like a badge of success by the time he's done with it. You know, Trump does better than anybody at grabbing the gun out of the mugger's hand and turning it around. You know, fake news was originally a complaint about Trump, and then he turned it around. Now it's a complaint about the entire media business, which he's ruined the credibility of completely. They've done a good job of that themselves. All right, let's talk about something else. In some Twitter feed yesterday, I guess, I was supporting Bernie's version of events with Elizabeth Warren. So it doesn't matter the details, but I did a supportive tweet about Bernie saying essentially that I believe his version of the story. And a number of Bernie supporters jumped in to say they were grudgingly agreeing with me because they're Bernie supporters, and they hated it because I'm such a terrible person and that I'm the worst person in the world, and that agreeing with me is hard because I'm so terrible. And I thought to myself, I don't know too many people I would call terrible people. I know a lot of people I disagree with. I know a lot of people who have done specific things I don't like. But I don't really think of too many people as just terrible people. And I think, what kind of fake news are you reading? Like, I don't even know where it comes from. What exactly have I done that would qualify me to be a terrible human? I mean, not just somebody you disagree with, not somebody who said a stupid thing, a dumb thing, not somebody whose opinions don't make sense, none of that, but a horrible human being, which was the most common thing that people were saying about me yesterday on Twitter, at least the critics. Now, none of that bothers me, of course, but I'm sort of amused by it because Bernie supporters are more toxic than I had imagined. You know, you probably saw the Project Veritas thing with one of the Bernie supporters who was just had some things to say, didn't he? You all saw that. And probably made you think, these Bernie supporters are an interesting group of people. You know, I'm sure most of them are, just have a preference for him as a politician, but there's some bad people in that group. I'm not going to paint the entire group by the bad ones, but there's some rough characters in that group. Now here's a frame for you that maybe you haven't heard yet. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's possible somebody has said this, or maybe lots of people and I haven't heard it. Do you remember the old days when IBM had personal computers and they were competing against Apple Computer? And Apple came up with this great way to frame the situation, the competition. Now, I don't know exactly how true it was, but it was a terrific way to frame it. And it went like this. that, there are people who go from IBM PCs, this is back in the day, they would switch out and they'd become Mac users. It was fairly common. But what Apple realized is that people didn't go back. In other words, you didn't see, or at least it was rare, it happens of course, but it was rare for somebody who was a Macintosh user to say, nah, I've decided to change my mind, I'll become an IBM PC user. But it was very common for somebody to go the other way and just stay there. And that's a really powerful frame. As soon as you hear that, you say to yourself, okay, that tells me everything I need to know, that it's just a one-way trip. Now, let's take that analogy, and again, analogies are not for persuasion, they're just to make points. Here's my point. We've been talking about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders having similar voters, and that one of them needs to shrink in order for the other to grow because it's the same pool. That neither of them can grow until one of them declines in popularity because the voters are going to go to the other one. Let me ask you this. After this Elizabeth Warren incident with Bernie, how many Bernie voters could go to Elizabeth Warren after she stabbed their candidate in the back, according to them? How many? None? Maybe none. How many Warren supporters, let's say she started falling in the polls and they wanted somebody who had similar policies, how many Warren supporters would be psychologically primed and ready and willing to go to Bernie? Maybe all of them. Maybe all of them. Because it's similar policies. And who are you going to go to? If Elizabeth Warren isn't going to work out, where are you going to go? Because Bernie didn't stab Elizabeth Warren, or at least it doesn't look like that. I mean, some people might think that. But I think it's a one-way trip. So at this point, if all of the, let's say the progressives or the socialists, democratic socialists, who want one of those two, the decision's already over. Let me say that again. If you're wondering which way it's going to go, will Bernie's people go to Warren or will Warren's people go to Bernie? That's over. You don't have to wonder anymore. There's only one way it can go at this point. It can only go from Warren to Bernie. The Bernie to Warren path is closed by what Warren did to Bernie. It's closed. So if you're going to predict, that's an easy one. Bernie will rise and Warren will fall, because Warren can never get enough of Bernie voters after what she did to him. You know I'm right. I saw an article that probably needs some more studies to back it up, that the birth control pill shrinks a part of the brain in women. Or it might be a weird correlation, but women who had been on birth control pills had one specific part of the brain that shrunk 6% on average, or it was smaller. So let me correct what I just said. The study did not show that being on the pill shrunk that part of the brain. It only showed that people on the pill had, on average, a smaller part of that brain. Could be some other reason, but it's hard to know what that would be. However, I ask you this. Have you ever had this experience, just anecdotally, of seeing somebody who went on birth control and their personality changed? Have any of you seen that? I've seen it twice. I saw people who basically became different people fairly quickly after going on birth control pills. Now, I don't know if that's a causation or correlation, because it's just two people, right? It's just anecdotal. I'm not aware of any studies that would back that up, except this one that I was just talking about. It's hard for me to imagine that you could put any kind of pill in a human being, male or female. Oh my God, I'm seeing a lot of yeses here. Okay, I wasn't expecting that, really, frankly. Now, I don't know if all the yeses are coming from men. Now, be aware, this could be confirmation bias, right? This is sort of the perfect confirmation bias, topic and domain. So I'm not going to make a claim. It's a question. And I ask you this, what are the odds that putting a powerful hormone-altering substance in your body, be you male or female, or whatever gender flavor you like, what are the odds it wouldn't change your personality? Because without being a doctor, it feels to me like the odds would be zero. Any change to your hormonal structure almost certainly is going to have an effect on who you are at some fundamental level. Well, I've never seen this many yeses. That was, okay. How many? So I'm wondering if this is mostly men, because it's hard for me to tell the genders of the people who are responding. But I worry that it's all men, because then I'd worry it's confirmation bias. But if the women are seeing it, then I'd feel a little more suspicion that this is something that needs to be dug into a little bit deeper. But just in general, changing your hormonal structure should change how you think. If it doesn't, I'd be surprised. So let's talk about the constitutional, or the strategy for impeachment. It looks like the Republicans' primary strategy, I don't know if we can tell for sure. Oh, somebody mentioned the prednisone. Yeah, when I was in prednisone just a few weeks ago, I was quite aware of a personality alteration. I was definitely a different person for the few weeks I was on it. So that's the same point. So it looks like the Republican strategy for impeachment is, rather than to argue the details, which would be a gigantic mistake, and it's the mistake that they've been taking from the start. It looks like, especially with Alan Dershowitz on the team, they're going to argue that it doesn't matter what the details are, because there's nothing that's alleged that's impeachable. So if the Republicans are planning this approach, I like it a lot. I like it a lot. And what it would look like, and here I'm just, playing the game through. I'm not suggesting that I'm predicting this, but one way that they could go is that the Republicans controlling the Senate will say, we're going to open up with discussions on whether or not any of the allegations fit the constitutional test of even being something appropriate for impeachment, before talking about whether it happened or didn't happen, who said what, who did a quid pro quo, who didn't, what you're expecting, what Lev Parnas said. Before getting into any evidence, just say, here are the two charges, and here's the basis for them. Does the Constitution say this is impeachable? And the answer is no, not even close. So I think that's going to be a good strategy. And what I would expect is this. I would expect that the Republicans will hear the constitutional arguments and then they'll put it to a vote. Now, can they have two votes? Can they vote and say, okay, let's say that against all odds, let's say that the majority of the Senate, and I don't think this could happen, but let's say they voted and said, yeah, on the question number one of whether these charges, if they're true charges, would be impeachable, we say yes. That's possible, right? But then separately, they'd have to have some other vote, I guess, to determine whether the charges are actually true. So that would be a separate thing. I don't think they have to get into the facts. I think they'll probably just dismiss it after the constitutional argument, which, by the way, would be the best way to defend the Constitution. Best way to defend the Constitution is to not let them talk about the details. Because if you let them talk about the details, you're going to be missing the whole point. And it becomes exactly what the founders didn't want it to be, a purely political process, even though we know the outcome. Why would you not try to defend the Constitution while you could, if you're a Republican senator, by saying, let's say that the victim here is the Constitution. So let's try to revive the Constitution a little bit. There was a disturbing video of a crowd in Baltimore who were sort of attacking a policeman who had a suspect on the ground. You may have seen it. It's a viral video now. So the police officer was trying to get control of a perp on the ground, and other people were coming up, and it looked like they were kicking the policeman, etc. And so there's, of course, a call for those people who were assaulting the policeman to be punished. And you say to yourself, well, good luck with that, because these were, random people who kicked the policeman and ran away. Like, what are you going to do? But it's on video. All right, but still, what are you going to do? It's hard to identify people just because you have them on video, right? Well, not anymore. Remember I told you yesterday there's a tool, an app called Clearview AI. It was the front page of the New York Times because it's a gigantic controversy about privacy and whether this is going to go too far and it's going to cause a dystopian everything and we're losing all our privacy. So those issues are important, all worth talking about. I think the ACLU is getting involved. I mean, it's becoming this big deal. But here's my point. That app, all it needs, in all likelihood, all it needs is a screen grab from the video of the crowd and a couple of screen grabs that get the faces. And law enforcement will probably have immediately the social media and real names of the perpetrators in the crowd because they have the technology now. They probably won't have to ask people. They probably won't have to ask the public. They probably won't have to go door to door. They probably won't need any witnesses. They probably just take the security camera video, run it through the Clearview AI app, and it's going to spit out their names. Think about that. I mean, man, it's a new world. All right. I know what you want to talk about. Yesterday, at the end of my Periscope, I ran, those of you who were here, I ran you through an exercise to reduce your anxiety in life, whatever the source of your anxiety is, whether it's an actual mental problem, something temporary, something you're worrying about. And I wanted to reinforce that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of reinforcement on top of that. This is a cumulative process. The first time you're exposed to it, you might not have a deep feeling of change. Some of you actually did. I heard from a lot of people yesterday who told me that the exercise immediately released their anxiety. Now, I assume that's temporary, but if you can find a way to temporarily release your anxiety, do it as often as you can, because that's how you get to eventually, a place where you have a stable lack of anxiety. I'm going to give you some more tricks and tips on this in a moment, but I did want to tell you that based on the feedback, it was completely successful. Now, completely successful doesn't mean it worked with every person, because I told you it wouldn't. You're all different. But completely successful in that a lot of people said it changed something. It changed something deeply meaningful to them. So I'm going to do it again. And the big thing I introduced, and by the way, I cut out just the part of my Periscope from yesterday and made a separate clip that's just the last part of the Periscope, so you can just see the anxiety solution technique. So that's on YouTube right now. Just search Real Coffee with Scott Adams on YouTube. It'll pop right up. So just look at the quick one if that's all you want. What I talked about on that, and it won't make as much sense unless you saw the other video, so I saved this for the end. If you need to see it in order, see that first, come back to this. I talked about seeing the world through different filters. And I'm going to give you some more filters so you get let's say, a deeper understanding of how this concept works. One of the things that people ask me about is how do you deal with the fact that you're going to have some bad news in the future. You don't know the details, but you know, for example, that somebody's going to die before you do. You know that there will be, various problems in life. And I'm going to give you a technique that I use. I've had a lot of pets, and I've had a lot of pets who passed. And I get very attached to my pets. And so when a cat dies, for example, it's a big deal. I had a cat for 19 years. It was my constant, workplace companion. And when she passed, it was a big deal. I have now a dog, most of you know, Snickers, who's at that age where if she's got another 2 years in her, I hope she has more, but the average for that breed would be a couple more years. She seems to be perfectly healthy now. But here's how I deal with the fact that when she passes, it will be like losing a limb. Yeah, I've heard that analogy before. I've heard people who won't get a second dog after the first one because the trauma of losing it is so extreme that they can't go through it again. I see a lot of you talking about the pain. And you see on social media people posting their painful situation if they have an animal that's about ready to pass. So let me tell you the filter I put on this. If you focus on the loss and the badness of it, you will feel anxiety and you will feel bad. But you do have the risk, you have the option of reframing this. And let me tell you how I reframe it for my pets and how I reframe it for Snickers so that I don't spend the next 2 years worrying about how I'm going to feel when her natural life comes to an end. And here's how I reframe it. I reframe it as a privilege and an honor. For me, the ability to be there at the end of her life, my dog, Snickers, is going to be an honor. It's going to be a privilege, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And when I think of it that way, it changes how I process it. Now, I know I'm going to feel terrible when the day comes, but until then, I'm just honored. I actually feel a sense of duty at a very deep level and commitment. And I felt the same way with my cats. In their final moments of life, I felt honored that I could be part of it. So I give you that. Let me give you a couple other filters. Have you ever worried that there's something big that you need to do that is really giving you anxiety? Let's say you're trying to buy a house, but you've never done that. You're like, how do people buy a house? How do they afford it? How do they work out all the details and the repairs and the contracts and all this? Or you're thinking about moving, and you think, how do people do this? Like moving is, let's say, to another state. It's a big deal. You think about getting married, you think about having families, you think about, and any one of these things you think about, they seem like really hard. If you've never done those things, they seem really hard. Here's the filter I put on that. There are a lot of idiots in the world, and they can do all of those things. The world is built for people of average capabilities. So if you're average or above average, and most of you are probably above average, if you're listening to this Periscope especially, and just tell yourself, there are millions and millions of idiots who figured out how to buy a house. Millions of idiots who learned how to move to another state. Millions and millions of idiots who had kids, got married, changed jobs. Millions of idiots learned to do a job that you wish you were smart enough to do. Guess what? You are. You are smart enough to do it because millions of idiots did it. The million idiot filter on life immediately removes your anxiety about things you haven't done before. Now, if the only people who had done the thing you want to do were geniuses, well, I guess you should worry about that. Unless you're a genius, like, well, the only people who can pull this off are geniuses. Do you know how many people pulled off buying a house? Not just the smart ones, all right? So that's a filter I like to use. It immediately makes me feel comfortable because almost anybody can do these things that look scary. Here's another one. You've heard this one before, the Adams law of slow-moving disasters. Throughout history, when humans can see a problem coming from far away, we have a 100% track record of solving it. For example, we're all going to run out of food because our population is growing. Well, we figured out birth control, we figured out fertilizer, we figured out better farming methods. We got food. We're going to run out of water because, well, it turns out we drilled for more water, we built more canals, we figured out how to get water to everybody. We're certainly going to run out of oil, and then, well, no, we figured out how to frack, we figured out how to make windmills and stuff. So, if you're looking at something such as the threat of climate science, I think a lot of you on this Periscope are not worried about it, but let's say you were. Remind yourself that society is genius at solving problems it sees coming from far distance. This will be no exception. Whatever problems come from climate change, could be little, could be a lot. I'm no scientist, and I don't believe anybody can really predict that stuff. But no matter what you think about it, the worst case scenario is that it is a problem, but we're really, really good at solving this stuff. We have companies coming online that can scrub CO2 out of the air if it ever becomes necessary. And then others, if you say, wait, we can't be scrubbing the CO2 out of the air because it's plant food. It's plant food. You'll destroy the earth by scrubbing all the CO2 out of the air. No, you won't. You'll just unplug them. If you get too much CO2, just unplug it. So don't worry about these big problems that we can see coming from miles away. Those are the ones we solve every time. The ones you need to worry about are the ones that came out of nowhere. You didn't see it coming. So we're very consistent about that. All right, here's another one. Sometimes when I feel really down, and it happens, I have to admit it hasn't happened in a long time, but in my past there have been times when I just felt beaten down by life, and sometimes you just don't want to wake up the next day. Here's a filter that I put on my life that I find really useful. Curiosity. It turns out that we humans are really motivated by curiosity, some more than others. It's the reason that a good author will put at the end of a chapter a little mystery. It's like, and then someone knocked at the door, and it's the next chapter, and you're like, I got to read a whole other chapter about another character before I find out who was knocking at that door. So it turns out that curiosity is a tremendous motivator for people. And here's a filter I put on things when I'm feeling depressed and down, and I just, my purpose for life seems to be extinguished temporarily. I say this: I wonder how this is going to turn out. And I just treat it as a curiosity. What if I'm just watching this life like a spectator? I also use I combine this with the no free will filter. Now, I believe that we don't have free will because I think physics, the laws of physics, don't stop when you get to your skull. Whatever's happening inside your skull is also subject to the laws of physics. So whatever causes and effects are coming into your head, there's only one thing that's going to come out of that because of the structure and the exactness of your brain and its architecture. So sometimes when things are not going my way, I just sit back and say, what if I just watch? Now, I still do all the things that I would do. I still brush my teeth, go to work, get in my car. I still do everything. But instead of saying, I'm deciding to do this, I say, I'm not deciding to do this. I don't have free will. I'm actually a spectator in my own life. I'm just watching. I'm watching myself brush my teeth. I'm watching myself go to work. I'm just watching. And I wonder, how does this game end? What happens tomorrow? Given this current situation, where am I going to be next week? And what you'll find is that can immediately take you out of your depression and into a mode of curiosity and a mode of just feeling like you're a spectator, and you don't have to have great stress because things aren't going the way you wanted them to go. Instead, you can say, well, they were going to go that way. There's no free will. I'm just along for the ride. I wonder how it turns out. Now, until you try it, you might not believe that will take you into a different mindset, but my experience is that it does. Here's another filter on life: God. I told you that one of the reasons that hallucinogens might be so effective for curing a whole range of mental problems, most of them anxiety related, I think, is that it takes your ego, the hallucinogens take your ego out of your worldview. And once you feel that you personally are not that important, or that you're just part of the whole, then you stop worrying so much about what you and your ego are going to experience tomorrow, because you're just not that important. You're not the main reason of the universe. It's just little you, and you'll be fine. And another way to get there is by belief in a higher power, belief in a God of one type or another. Because the God model, the way most people practice it, is that God is great and you're not. It kind of puts you in your place. Believing in religion puts you in your place. It takes your big old ego, well, I'm pretty special, and it just says, no, you're not. God is special. You're just a follower. Yes, it teaches you humility by giving you a contrast to something that needs no humility, right? An omnipotent power, humility would make no sense at all, because it would just be a lie. So when you compare yourself, and contrast is one of the great principles of managing your psychological state and persuasion and everything else. Anytime there's a contrast, it helps focus you and understand things in their place. So believing there's a God who is great puts you in your place. So I think that could be a good filter. And here, somebody just said exactly what I was going to say next. Alcoholics Anonymous uses this technique. So if you go into an AA meeting to try to quit alcohol or drugs, there's a drug version of it, they recommend that you sort of put yourselves in the hands of a higher power. Now, they're not too specific about, you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to be a specific kind of belief, but whatever you believe is a higher power. If you're not a believer, you could say, well, the higher power is physics. I don't have free will. I just release myself to free will. Or if you believe in a God, you say, I just release myself and let sort of God work through me. Now that's a filter. We don't need to decide whose religion is right or if God even exists. You don't need to. It's a filter that works. Because the Alcoholics Anonymous process, apparently, from everything I've learned, is one of the few things that does work. And I think that the active part of the process is removing your ego by putting yourselves in the hand of a higher power. The other thing that does to remove your ego is a part of the process, part of the steps, and again, if somebody knows more about this than I do, just chime in. But part of it is essentially apologizing to all the people you hurt, which again is ego. It's all ego. If you go into any kind of a rehab situation, you give up, sort of all the other parts of your life. You're stripped down to just your biological entity. You're put in your place. Your ego is removed, or at least reduced. So that's one filter, belief in the higher power. Here's another filter, optimism. The way you should see optimism, in other words, simply just telling yourself that there are some good things ahead, because you can dwell on the bad stuff and it can change your whole mental state. Or you can do what Tony Robbins suggests in his own way, and I'm going to suggest in my own way. Same idea. That your brain is only capable of thinking about so much in any single time. We're not real good multitaskers. If your brain is focused on one thing, it doesn't have much left for other things. You can find out if there's a train coming at you while you're doing your taxes, but mostly you have a certain amount of shelf space, I call it, in your brain. You have some control, actually a lot of control, over what's on the shelf. If you don't take control of it, and you just say, well, I'm just going to wake up today and go on with my life. All I'm going to do today is whatever comes up. I'll do my tasks, I'll do my job, I'll know what I'm supposed to do. Your shelf space will fill up. without your control. It will just fill up with whatever thoughts were going to bubble up. What kind of thoughts tend to bubble up if you don't manage your shelf space? The good ones? No. You could probably confirm this from your own experience. If you are idle and you don't have much to think about, do you automatically drift into happy thoughts? Sometimes. But far more often, the negative is what bubbles up, because we're designed that way. Humans are designed to find problems and then fix them. We're not designed to dwell on things that are going well. Look around your atmosphere or your environment. How much of your environment are you actively processing? Very little of it, because it's going well. I've got a table over there that's not bothering me at all. It requires no attention at all. It's not my consciousness. So actively learn to fantasize and imagine positive outcomes in a variety of ways, so that whenever you feel your shelf space is starting to get a little room in it, fill it. Fill it consciously, directly, intentionally. Fill it. Never let your shelf space fill itself. You control that. You get to think about what you want to think. I mean, if you have some terrible tragedy, it's going to be hard to keep it out of your head. But for most of us, our just daily life, you can fill that thing with anything you want. In my 20s, trying to crowd out bad memories of my childhood, which was pretty horrific, I would fill it with work. So I would just work myself to exhaustion, fall asleep, and then get up early in the morning and work myself to exhaustion again. And it really worked. Now, not everybody can work themselves to exhaustion for year after year, but I filled my shelf space, and whenever I felt it starting to fill on its own, I would very actively crowd it out with optimism. You see President Trump operating on this principle, and he got it. He came to it honestly and really exactly the same way I did, through the impact of Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote the book The Power of Positive Thinking. Coincidentally, or not, was the Trump family pastor or minister, I forget which is the right word, at their family church. Where they went to church, they saw the king of positive thinking, the most famous positive thinking promoter in the United States ever. And you see Trump do it all the time. He's very much filling his shelf space with optimism, and ours too. Here's another technique. If you want to work on your ego, put yourself in situations in which you embarrass yourself often and survive. How many times have you seen me embarrass myself right here on Periscope? And then the next day, well, I'm back again. Here's my coffee. Tastes good. Have you ever seen embarrassment change my behavior or even my attitude? Probably not. And I wasn't always that way. I used to be, easily embarrassed. And it would ruin my whole day, ruin my week, ruin my month. The feeling of embarrassment, it's like, I'm reliving it in my mind, that time I did that. But how many times have you seen me have to blow my nose on camera? Because, I just had to. How many times, I was rewatching one of my Periscopes. I watched some of them just to see what I'm doing, to make sure I'm doing what I want to be doing. And I'm replaying it, and I realized that I went in this extended discussion of Iraq, but I kept referring to it as Iran. And when I watched it, I was like, ugh, I can't believe I had this extended discussion of the wrong country just because my mind mixed up the words. My first thought was just sort of a flash of anger. I was just mad that it happened, so sort of mad at myself. But I never once felt embarrassed. Not even a little. And it takes a lot of practice to get there. So I recommend putting yourself in situations, maybe join Toastmasters where you have to talk in front of people, do something that's outside of your comfort zone. Just embarrass yourself. And then find out, just track it, wake up the next day. Hey, food tastes the same, have the same friends. Nothing really changed. So the embarrassment filter is a good one. Just practice embarrassing yourself until it just doesn't feel like painful anymore. It's very doable. Here's another filter that's more similar to the one that I talked about in my prior Periscope. Every now and then, I like to imagine that I'm in a video game. Now, that's very much what I was telling you to visualize. Visualize that you're sort of in a virtual reality rendered environment. What that does is it puts you in the moment because you're forced to think about your immediate situation because you're imagining it rendered. And that takes your ego out of things because you're not focusing on yourself and your needs for a while. So it helped a lot of people relax. But here's another way I think of it. There are days when I say to myself, today was just like a video game. And I feel like I captured a resource or I learned something that allowed me to go up to the next level of the game. And here are a few levels which I would like to suggest that some of you have already passed through. One of those levels toward the bottom is understanding that people are fundamentally irrational. Now, I wrote my book, Win Bigly, to reinforce that idea. If you are going through life thinking that other people are rational, you will be frustrated and unhappy every day because people are not rational. And if you try to imagine that they are, your understanding of what should happen next won't match what happens next. Because you'll say, well, here are my 10 good reasons why you should agree with me. And then you think, well, now you'll agree with me. But then you don't, because we're irrational. So expecting people to act rationally is a formula for stress and anxiety. So the first time that you move up a level in this, let's call it the video game of life, you can't move up a level until you get that. And you really have to get it. And I don't mean saying that sometimes other people are irrational. I mean that it's the base code of our existence. It's our operating system. We operate on confirmation bias and a subjective kind of reality. Which leads me to the next level. It's one thing to say that people are irrational, but it's next level in terms of a video game. It's next level thinking to say that maybe our entire reality is subjective. Which doesn't mean there isn't something real, but understanding that our human evolution was never directed at giving us understanding of reality. We did not evolve, or at least there's no reason to believe we evolved, to understand the nature of reality. It wasn't important. A clam can reproduce without understanding reality. A cat can reproduce without understanding nearly as much as we understand. Understanding reality, and like really understanding it, completely optional, and maybe even unproductive, for evolution. So we did not evolve with that capability, and indeed you can see that we don't have it. Just observe how people act. So once you really realize that we're all in a different movie, that we're looking at the same document and seeing a different reality, you've got a different religion than somebody else, once you understand how subjective our experience is, you move up to the next level. Right? So the first level is understanding that people are fundamentally irrational. And the level after that is that irrationality is related to the fact we're not even seeing the same world. We exist in it and we interact, but we keep getting confused and tense in our interactions because we don't understand why you're not seeing what I'm seeing. And the reason is different realities. And then here's the next level above that, because I believe a lot of you have already passed through those two levels. The level above that is to understand that your brain is programmable. And not just a little bit. You all know that you can learn something, and that's, in a sense, that's programming your brain. But it's much deeper than that. You can fundamentally change your preferences. Yes, you can change your preferences. I have experimented with this over the years. I'm not going to give you examples because I don't want to get into the details, but I have actually experimented trying to like something I didn't like and to see if I could do it until I loved it. And I've also experimented taking something I loved, let's say eating Snickers candy bars, and turning it into something I didn't like, and I can succeed. It's completely doable. You can rewire your preferences. Now, you have to understand that. If you think the only thing you can do is add memories, or maybe you can add a little skill, you don't get to go to the next level. You have to understand that you can change your basic personality if you know how to do it. That's the highest level. I've done it a whole number of times. I've watched other people do it. So, and it takes a little trial and error to do it. But what we're talking about today is exactly that, is reprogramming your brain. Let me give you my favorite example of programming a brain. I've been watching Christina, my fiancée, recovering her piano skills from when she was younger. She took piano lessons when she was younger. And I've watched her recently go from somebody who had some basic piano skills and knew how to play the piano better than most people, but just sort of a good piano player, to the last 2 weeks she learned one of the most complicated Chopin, what would you call it? I don't know, pieces that you've ever heard in your life. And if you don't play the piano, Chopin apparently is extra hard in terms of where your fingers go at what time. Is just really hard. If you hear somebody playing the piano on, say, a rock song, they're doing something called an accompaniment. By the way, I just learned this. So if somebody is playing an accompaniment with other instruments and a singer in a band, that's relatively easy piano playing, because that's sort of bing ba ding ding ding, bing ba ding ding ding, somewhat simple patterns. That's all you need to accompany a band. If you're a solo artist and you're playing Chopin, both of your hands are operating completely independently. Each of your fingers is operating independently, and you're putting together hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many notes there are in a Chopin piece, thousands, but at least as many hundreds, right? And I'm walking by, and I'm hearing her practice, and just in the last few weeks, she got to the point where she's memorized the entire piece, and now she's just, honing it. And I think to myself, what the heck happened inside her actual physical brain? She rewired her brain in 2 weeks. I mean, a pretty substantial rewiring, because none of the skills that she is demonstrating at a near virtuoso level didn't exist 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's all, we call it muscle memory, but of course it's in the brain, it's not in your muscles. And so when you see people fundamentally rewiring, something insanely impressive in 2 weeks, she practiced a lot, but it's just 2 weeks. You start to realize how programmable your brain is. So everybody who's got a loop in their brain that's not working, you might be able to reprogram that. And I have lots of experience of doing it myself. Now let me give you a fun analogy. If you're a computer programmer, do you ever write programming code for a computer in zeros and ones? Do you sit down and say, all right, I'm going to write a program 00001, 111000, and then 11100? Well, no, you don't. Now, there may be special cases where somebody's doing some deep engineering and they are actually looking at the zeros and ones. But that's not typically the way you write a program. The way you write a program is with something that's analogous to but different from a language, like an English language or a French or Spanish or whatever. You have words with letters, and you use some numbers too, but brackets and words, and they stand for something that the computer translates into zeros and ones. Here's my analogy. When you hear language or you have experiences, the language and the experiences of just hearing things in the spoken word is being translated into your brain into the equivalent of zeros and ones. Now, your brain doesn't work on zeros and ones. It works on, connections that get strengthened and built, and some are emphasized and de-emphasized and stuff. But the point is that when the programmer is writing the program, they don't see the zeros and ones. They don't know exactly what the zeros and ones are doing. They just know what the outcome will be. When a hypnotist or somebody doing what I'm doing, taking you through a guided visualization, I'm having you imagine something that you're imagining in pictures and you're hearing in words. But these are symbolic tools that are actually rewiring your brain. So when you hear me just talking and you say, how can you rewire my brain just by talking? Well, the answer is it's the same way a programmer can program a computer without knowing what zeros and ones are happening. I don't know which neurons are firing. I don't know which connections are being made. But through trial and error and experience, I can make general assumptions that effectively become the user interface for your brain. So, find the user interface for your brain. You're getting close. You've gone up 2 levels. You're on the cusp, maybe some of you are there, of reaching the next level in the game where you can intentionally reprogram your own brain. And then level after that is you can reprogram other people's brains. So, check out the anxiety. Let me ask you here. How many people on here experienced the anxiety exercise, the anti-anxiety exercise I did, and tell me what experience you had? How many of you experienced something like a reduction of anxiety? It's going to take a while for the comments to catch up. So I'll stall until, all right. So I'll read you the comments as they come in. It helped me. Nothing but I tried made me feel sad. Remember I said everybody will have a different experience. There's a yes, I did, I tried it, nothing happened, and a body experience. Some people will have that. No change. Somebody said, freed my brain, thumbs up. Yep, I did. Me, totally relaxed. No, yes, it helped. Somebody said it didn't help. Yes, no. Yeah, on YouTube is where you'll find the stored thing. Calming, I definitely did. I felt like it was being in denial. It was very unusual. It reframed things, definite reduction, good reminder, no change, definitely relief, me, no, husband, yes, felt like floating, etc. All right. Remember what I told you. Actually, this is actually more of a response than I was actually expecting. But remember that this is cumulative. So in the example of there was a husband and wife where I think the husband felt something and the wife didn't. Remember, you're all at a different starting place. It could be that the people who felt something profound were right at the cusp of moving up to the next level and just easily moved to the next level. Could be that some of you need a little more understanding of frames, and that's what I did for you today. So you'll find that this needs to be reinforced, but the more I reinforce it for you, the closer you're going to get to feeling something like that. But of course, everybody's different. We should not expect that any solution, medical or physical or otherwise, will work the same way for other people. All right, and let me do it for you again right now. Find a place on your floor, wherever you are. Look at the floor, and wherever the floor is the largest area. Now, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to get it right, but just look at what it looks to you, in your opinion, like the largest floor area you can see. And now imagine, using yesterday's technique, that is rendered. It's not real. You're in a video game, you're at a level, and everything here is artificial. Just think about that today. I'll let you do that on your own. And when you feel in the moment, because this exercise will just bring you to the moment, you'll feel your environment moving in between being what you thought was real and what you can easily imagine is not. And that will keep you in the moment. It will reduce the effect of your ego tapping on your shoulder, and it will calm you. The more you exercise your ability to calm yourself, the better you'll be. And that's all for today.